This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program Spotlight now, we bring you a discussion on significance of Prime Minister's visit to Varanasi. The participants are Professor Shivroto Mukherjee, political analyst, and Kumar Dhananjay, journalist.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi concluded visit to his parliamentary constituency, Varanasi. He was on a one-day visit to his constituency. He inaugurated projects, in fact, worth 1,200 crores and dedicated them to the nation. He also inaugurated and dedicated to the nation statue of Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay, which is 63 feet tall. Professor Mukherjee, any visit by a Prime Minister to his constituency has its own significance. It's not a general visit to a constituency by a Member of Parliament. He represents Varanasi, which has a huge historical and even in the present day, a lot of importance in the country's politics and social cultural phenomenon. How do you look at it?
Dhananjay, you see that the first time Modi got elected from Varanasi was in a very important fact and a feat because he did not belong to Uttar Pradesh and then he swept the poll and also in a way earned lot of praise from the local inhabitants, and after that he continued to visit the constituency, and his second time when he won from there, it was again a reinforcement of his earlier plan of development. And if you remember that both the first and second time, the campaign that he really made the central focal point was Vikash, development. And this has a very important connotation for countries like ours, which is a post-colonial one. And Johnson really described India as a developmental state following the model of Japan and then South Korea. So it has a particular significance in a country which embraced political democracy, but the problem of economic democracy remained. So in that kind of a situation, the state becomes the focal point and the most important motivator for bringing in considerable improvement in the life of the people by proper initiative and direction. Now here again, if you really look to that once the process of liberalization and globalization started in the 1990s, after that there had been quite a substantive change in our outlook and policies, and the integration of the world has brought in our own problems and benefits. So it was a time, I thought, a readjustment with the world capitalistic system and to create a new kind of a situation for India which is living with dignity and prosperity, and that I think defines in a way the Prime Minister Modi, and when he goes back to his constituency, the same theme continues, and that is important point of today's visit.
While addressing people at a gathering, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi stressed that the country is formed not just from the government but from the culture and values of every citizen. He further said, and I quote, "Our conduct as a citizen will determine the future and direction of a new India." What is this new India he is emphasizing upon?
He is emphasizing this for quite some time, and I think there is a deeper meaning of it. I think the first important point is that the state cannot everything by itself. It can give direction, and within that larger parameter, there is also a question of citizen participation, response, and sharing responsibility. And in that context, he is raising some very important points of, in a way, rededication. If you really look to that, India was a developmental state from the very beginning of Indian independence, and the cultural point that he raises is again very important, because unless until we imbibe the scientific spirit, the rational spirit, and also the idea of progress, then otherwise it will be very difficult for nations like India to move in a direction that really leads to the solution of many of the problems of the world. For instance, climate change. India is a key player there. So is the development aspects of education, healthcare, and also the fact that you look to the generational imperative. India is an old civilization, but it's a young nation. So it's in a paradoxical situation that the cultural point, the civilizational inklings, the founding is there of 5,000 years. But then how do you incorporate these values in a younger generation and make qualitative transformation in the nation? That, I think, is the purpose of his reference to all these important points.
You made a very important point about old civilization and young nation. Any visit to a constituency by a Prime Minister has its own importance. But when a Prime Minister is visiting his own constituency in a federal setup like India, where we have different states, he got elected from Varanasi. So what is the significance that when we are trying to say through various programs like even Ek Bharat, Shresth Bharat, some claims, and there are doubts about it, but there are still claims that Varanasi is the oldest city in the world, and he represents that constituency. So visiting that constituency and inaugurating these projects, how does he is trying to fit in modernity, tradition and culture in one go?
Well, the oldest cities, if you really look to the competition, the only city can compete with Varanasi is Damascus. And in that way, I don't think really one can dispute the length of the civilization. And if you remember Satyajit Ray, he really universalized the lanes and bylanes of Varanasi in his films. And there is also Madan Mohan Malviya's marvel, that is the modernity aspect is there. So in a way, you see, Varanasi in a way symbolizes modern India. It had a great past heritage, and then of course the religious factors, the cultural factors, and then the modern period. And in that context, addressing it from the heartland of India, and Uttar Pradesh being the largest state and the most populated one, I think he is addressing to the entire nation, just not to Varanasi or Uttar Pradesh. In a way, his effort is similar to Deng's effort in China. If you remember, all the time he used to pronounce the great cultural heritage of China. And what Deng meant at that time was that the present state of affairs of China is not actually in keeping up with its civilization standards and the goal it had to reach. So in a way, it's a transformative kind of an appeal that what we were and what we are, there is a mismatch. And we have to transcend the present to create a better order which may be something like the glories we had in India. You know the famous statement, wonder that was India. And now that wonder has to be created in the modern setting. In that way, I think he makes a very important point, the cultural point. You see, C.P. Snow's book, if you remember, The Two Cultures, which talks of a proper understanding of social sciences and natural sciences, here also a similar attempt to comprehend the major contradictions of India, the problems that India suffer, and to look to it sympathetically and symbolically that the transformation is possible and that is to be very quick and acceptable to the people.
As you rightly said, Varanasi, it's an old city. There's religion, culture, social aspect of it that we have talked about a number of times. The visit of Prime Minister to his constituency, does his visit give a fillip to other districts, other constituencies as well as so far as development is concerned?
Dhananjay, I think it does. You mentioned the central importance of Uttar Pradesh in politics. I remind you that Shyama Prasad Mukherjee's famous statement, India that is Bharat, that is Uttar Pradesh. And symbolically, if you really look to, unless the heartland gets developed, then the entire nation really does not move forward. Now, if you again look to the geography of India and the economic levels of development, the coastal areas are much better off than the heartland. So, to address developmental issues and problems from Uttar Pradesh, which is politically very important, but economically still not very strong, I think what he is trying to say is that this is an inequality that is intolerable. So we have to create a situation where the Indian democracy is looked to not only as a success story politically, but also it is to be looked to as a success story economically. So there is to be a larger awareness. You look to the way the development initiatives he had taken today. One is, of course, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, one of the finest minds, if I say in the modern political theory, that he envisages a different kind of humanism and the details of it. But apart from that, he is also taking initiative in introducing a new train that will lead to some very important religious centers, but that is privately run. So the limitation of the state, the public-private partnership, and the colossal task of rebuilding India, all of them get, I think, defined in his initiative of taking note of facts which really is applicable to entire nation. So I think the constituency is Varanasi, and of course the elected members from Uttar Pradesh will take note of what he had said, but I think the others also, not only of his own political party, but others will also note the way the India is growing, and ultimately you see what is the purpose of a political process is to have a larger consensus in the nation. And the problem in India had been that it was somewhat an adversarial democracy. Now it is slowly moving towards a consensual one to reinforce that argument.
Very rightly said. But what the question I asked you, I had in my mind that it's a Niti Aayog data where we find that UP is doing not really well on social indexes, whether it is girl-child education and so on and so forth. We can pick up any example. And Prime Minister constituency falls in that state. What is the reason that why UP is lagging so behind?
I think the problem is the largeness of it. Remember that many times it was talked about that UP should be divided into 3 or 4 states and all that. But whatever it may be, if you really compare to the much smaller states, the social indicators are not as far. But then, if you really look to the problems of Uttar Pradesh, then I think you have to consider it differently from other states. One very important reason is the magnanimity or the nature of the problem that requires a larger, longer time span of solution. And unless and until again there is a kind of consensus that is there in developing the state, I think the underdevelopment will remain a factor to live with. For instance, the social indicators point you made, I think the gender gap is quite high in Uttar Pradesh, and all these things are to be looked to in a way that a municipality is run. That is, the smaller problems of the state are to be solved in a way that a larger edifice remains complete and growing. And that should be the effort of Uttar Pradesh. It's quite a formidable task, and I think the Prime Minister is aware of it.
Do you see this visit of Prime Minister will give fillip to the developmental activities in Varanasi?
I think so, Dhananjay, that any visit of a Prime Minister anywhere is taken note of. And the very fact that he went back to Varanasi and announced a large number of health schemes, and as I told you earlier, the development is the major plank of his Prime Ministership, I think people will take note of it, and there will be motivation to make India a better state than what it is today.
Well, with those words, let's hope that this is what is going to happen, that Prime Minister's visit to his constituency will give a boost to developmental activities in Uttar Pradesh and in Varanasi, and will ensure a good future for the citizens of not only Varanasi but also Uttar Pradesh. Professor Mukherjee, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on significance of Prime Minister's visit to Varanasi. The participants were Professor Shivroto Mukherjee, political analyst, and Kumar Dhananjay, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website newsonair.com. You can also follow us on the News on AIR app for updates. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.